Okay, so let's look at our selection today. It's focusing on the Ministry of Truth, and I'll probably be coming back to that in later broadcasts. But really, this is just a fantastic book, Lynskey's book, Dorian Lynskey. It's the story of a book. I would have called it the story of a book, 1984. He calls it a biography of a book. And it's really an incredible contextualization of a book over time, so that we look at the origins of the book. Some of that involves the biography of Orwell himself, George Orwell, the author, who makes that makes for really interesting reading and is very, very exciting and is on its own interesting. But the book itself, as if you like, a dystopia, and I'll come back to that word as the broadcasts go by, is so far-reaching. First of all, he was dying when he wrote it, so that intersection of the personal and the kick in the story, or the depth of the story, the spread of the story, the reach of the story is just of the book 1984. Those two things together are compelling as you read Lynskey's book. But it gets interesting after Orwell's death. I mean, I found that really interesting, was that as somebody who like most of us, I guess, who read about a book and its author, and usually when the author dies, things to some extent are over. But the great value in this book is that it shows really right up until the present day, 2020, just how effective and how strong this book is. You have so many incidentals, I would call them. They're not incidentals because they're so powerful. For example, Orwell introduced the idea of the Cold War. And for those people listening in Cambridge at the moment, Cambridge, England, people have done theses on this. Man, if you look at doublethink, if you look at also doublespeak, if you look at all sorts of things that Orwell came out with, and also there's a very interesting approach in the book, which I think is okay. I mean, I think it's appropriate and good scholarship and all that. It's very market-based, very American, I suppose, because what it does is that it looks at how we develop our thinking about books with respect to how many copies they sell. So what we've got is a situation where when Donald Trump comes out with fake news, there are all sorts of echoes, of course, with Orwell's book. So that means that sales go up exponentially, or whatever the word is, at that moment. And so the book lives, and it lives by virtue of the slogans and so forth in the book. The slogans, the concepts, the storyline. It crops up in so many unexpected ways. I mean, all my life I've been listening to David Bowie, and it turns out that David Bowie modelled so much of his work on 1984. He even wrote an opera on 1984, which was not given permission declined, whatever the word is, by the executor of the estate, where our tale hangs. The way Orwell's estate worked is probably different to the way most literary estates, certainly I would say different to the way most literary estates work, because 1984 went into so many dimensions. It turns up in comic books. It turns up in situations where you have a comic book based on George Orwell, on 1984, I'm sorry, but of course on Orwell, which introduces a Guy Fawkes Marx, which is not in 1984. But that derivation, if you see what I mean, at the comic book level, produces a mask that becomes a symbol of protest around the world. And I always call them Zorro masks for some reason, but they're Guy Fawkes masks. And if you look at so many things that are to do with critique of the state that we have now, so many of them came from that book. Now, then I also want to talk a little bit about, just as I close out on this book, because I only want to take 10 minutes on it, with the discussion of Lynskey himself, Dorian Lynskey. This is quite brilliant, and I've not heard anybody else say it, so I'm saying it. This guy is a real phenomenon. He took that idea that I started to talk about at the beginning of this little segment of the biography of a book, and made a really great job of it, a really incredible job. And at the time of closure, at finishing the book, obviously the biography is not over, because books live and live and live. The other thing that he does very well is introduce the spread. I've talked about the spread of comic, we've talked about the comic books and so on, and the echoes. I've got a personal echo because I know Canterbury Square in Islington, and Orwell lived at 47B. There's a comic strip which has a room at 47B, as very similar to the room in 1984, one of the rooms, and so it goes on. The book became a source of metaphor, became a source of cue, if you like. It really is a brilliant exposition by this man Lynskey, and I'm just waiting for another book by him. Okay, just very quickly moving across the window today. Well, it was first of all, right beside the Ministry of Truth, I've got my book Papers on Language, of 2017. The latest edition thereof, and the reason for that is that there is a coincidence of reference. For example, Lynskey refers to Postman, Neil Postman, who I've always had a lot of time for Neil Postman. Neil Postman's theory is that we're amusing ourselves to death, and that television is an extraordinarily limited thing that is not doing us any good. I mean, that does a gross disservice to Postman. But I encourage people to read Postman. Neil Postman's a really very important scholar. Okay, so where that fits in with my work is that I have the argument with respect to, not necessarily against, but with respect to Māori television, and the idea that television helps endangered languages, or in this case helps the Māori language. And of course I'm coming at it from the point of view of whether radio is better than television, and at the same time I think that the trivialization that Postman is talking about and that is picked up on towards the end of the book by Lynskey is similar to what I'm talking about. Okay, so just moving along to look at the other books. I'm flagging two that I'm going to be talking quite extensively about. One, of course, is Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick's History of the United States, which is a brilliant book, an absolute pearler of a book. I mean, it is just so good. It really is so impressive, and I'm going to be talking about it. And I know these two books, the Lynskey book and the Kuznick and Stone book. I mentioned Kuznick because I think he does a great job as an historian, and Stone as a visionary and a thinker. I know I'm gushing about both of those books, and to be fair, I don't think I've been gushing about, say, for example, the Anthony Cadis's book, Scar Tissue, which I'm going to be talking about in the next segment. These are very good books in our decade, in this decade. Yeah, very important. And finally, over on the other side, the biography of Stone. And Oliver Stone, and he is just such an important person in our lives. You are with Peter Cleve, and books and books. Okay, so just a note in closing about an earlier edition of Books and Books. I'd suggested that the rock bio was a genre with three parts. The three parts being the falling in love, the hitting of the drugs, and then the drug rehab. But the other part, the fourth part that I didn't mention, which runs through that set of books that I was talking about, was the road, the travelling, and the idea of being in some kind of a bubble, which in all cases, Dave Grohl's case, Anthony Kiedis's case, Steve Earle's case, right through to even with Lenny Bruce and going back to Jack Kerouac, obviously with On the Road. The road is a place that I'm not sure that we've really managed to articulate the scope, as it were, of the bubble, of the bounded experience, or whatever you want to call it, of the road. So I just leave that up there, and with that a look over at Richard Branson's autobiography, which is really good and really fantastic, and which is on the edge of these rock bios, because of course with Virgin Records he was very close to all that, and with his personal life sometimes too, but also particularly with the road, and in his case the ballooning or the air, Virgin Air and so on. So there you go, and just closing out, you're with Peter Cleveland, Books and Books.